Hello and welcome to Speaking Spirit, where we talk about all things spiritual. Your host, John Moore, is a shamanic practitioner and spiritual teacher. And now, here's John.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to wish you good morning, as I usually do when I record this in the morning, even though you may be listening to this at any time of the day, I don't know. Wherever you are in the world. Today's topic, I'm hoping, will be a little bit fun and a little bit useful and give you some knowledge and give you some practical things to do as well. But today I'm going to talk about ghosts and hauntings and paranormal activity. Sounds spooky. One of the reasons this topic came up for me is that as I record this, we are going in from summer into fall. In a couple of weeks, we will be into fall season. Where I live in the northeast of the United States, it's it gets very dark, very early, as it does in many northern parts of the world. The leaves change color and eventually fall off, and the trees are bare. And of course, we have Halloween, which is a big holiday here for children to collect candy, but amongst other things, recognized as Samhain in the Celtic cycle, and around the same time as All Souls Day and Day of the Dead. It's a time where in many cultures the veil between worlds gets thinner. And the belief is that spirits of our ancestors can return and have dinner with us and celebrate. And that's super common. In Celtic times, they would set out a feast for ancestors. Day of the Dead in Mexico, they have the ofrendas where they offer up food and candles and flowers and things. And so it's a time that, we associate here with spooky things and scary things and, jack-o'-lanterns, which were lit originally to scare off the quote-unquote evil spirits while welcoming the lovely spirits in. Because not all ghosts were scary to ancient peoples, but we've made a whole industry around horror movies and ghost stories and that sort of thing. And depending upon where you are in the world, there are different traditions around this and around that sort of thing. But where I live, Halloween is celebrated. People love to get scared around Halloween. They love to watch horror movies. They dress up in scary ways. They have parties. If you're not familiar with the tradition of trick-or-treating, which not everywhere in the world celebrates, children dress up in costumes and go from home to home, and people generally give them candy and things like that. And my kids are now getting a little, getting too old to trick or treat, but I think last year might have been their final year doing that, but we'll see. But I used to love taking them out, going door to door, and people loved seeing the kids and handing them candy. So anyway, it's that time of year where I'm going to talk about ghosts and paranormal activity. It may pick up. If you are living in a culture that believes that, the veil between worlds is thinner and, at a specific time or day that it allows spirits to come through more easily. The other reason that I'm talking about this is that paranormal stuff has been coming up for me a lot. And I'll tell some stories today too. I was a guest on a podcast recently where, I told a story that I'll tell today, and this was a paranormal podcast, by the way, and the person said, "Oh gosh, that's extremely frightening." And I thought, well, is it? I mean, is it really frightening? I didn't find it frightening that there are spirits around, and doing stuff, and witnessed by 20 plus people. But some people still have this fear of spirit because it's the unknown. It's things the invisible, things we can't see. From a shamanic perspective, because I practice shamanism, we are constantly surrounded by spirits. You just don't, we don't see them in normal reality. Like, if you're sitting in a room somewhere or out in nature or whatever, you're surrounded by spirits all the time. So having one act up a little bit is not incredibly scary for me. Having them affect physical reality is still a little bit, can be a little bit surprising, shocking sometimes, but not like it doesn't, at this point in my life, doesn't make me afraid. So there, I will definitely talk about there's some paranormal activity happening around me at this moment, and it's not frightening me or anything. Sometimes it's a little annoying. Sometimes it wakes me up at night, or wakes up other people, or stuff shows up in my house that shouldn't be there, or otherwise. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I will also talk about some things you can do if you feel like you have a mischievous or bothersome spirit around you in your home. Sometimes they gravitate towards homes. Sometimes they gravitate towards people. So moving might not help too much if you have a spirit that is following you around. So, it should be fairly obvious from the way that I talk that I do believe in an afterlife, and I do believe in a spirit and soul that is separate but associated with the body. And, at the time of death, the soul separates from the body completely, and we pass on because there's nothing animating the body anymore. That's regardless of the way in which a person actually dies. If they're sick or, injured or what have you, which it might be the cause of death, right? The thing that stops you from breathing, and, your soul can no longer hang on to this body because it's not operating anymore. The soul separates from the body, and that is spiritual death. What I will say in my experience is that for most people, the spirit will hang around on this plane, which in shamanism we call the middle world, which is the spiritual version or the spiritual overlay of the 3D world that we live in. Shamans recognize multiple worlds, really infinite levels, but we, to really generalize, we talk about upper world, lower world, and middle world. And this isn't heaven, hell, and earth. The lower world is not hell from a shamanic perspective. It's where we do a lot of work, healing work, meet power animals, that sort of thing. And it's actually a pretty beautiful place. It's a very natural kind of place. And then there's the upper world, and that's where we meet sort of upper world teachers. And so, I'll talk a little bit about my experience of where souls go when people die, right? So, a lot of, systems, religions, spiritual beliefs center around punishment and reward, heaven and hell, purgatory, all of these things. That's just not reality in my experience, and I won't argue. I won't argue with your beliefs or my beliefs. You're welcome. You're welcome to them. But I have done a fair amount of work with death and dying, and what I've experienced is that people kind of go, because spirit is formless. Where you go after you die is formless, but consciousness can represent that as a place, and you as having, a body, even though you don't have a physical body. It really differs depending upon the person. And, so your expectations when you're living towards the end of your life matter a whole lot to where you wind up. And absolutely reincarnation is a thing as well. So some people come back, some people do not come back. All kinds of things happen. There's all kinds of crazy things that happen. If you think crazy things happen when you're alive, you should see what happens when you die. So I have on occasion, gone to where people go when they die in shamanic journey, gotten information from, these spirits that I could not have gotten any other way. So to me, it was really confirmation that I was not making this up. So for example, somebody said, I want you to contact my aunt and see how she's doing. And so I journeyed for that person and went to their aunt in the afterlife where they were, and came back and could describe what the aunt looked like, described that she was a painter. I didn't know that before I journeyed, that she was visiting and playing cards with the grandmother, so spirits can visit other spirits of the afterlife and have a social life and really have a wonderful life. And, my take is that the whole heaven and hell and purgatory thing is just a method of control, as a lot of organized religion is. It's a way to control behavior, right? Back before we had police departments and things like that, we controlled people's behavior by threatening them with hell and promising them heaven if they behaved according to our rules. That's my take. You might differ with that, and that's okay. That's totally fine. But obviously, I'm going to present my viewpoint. So, I've done a lot of that work, and I've done a lot of what we call psychopomp work, which is helping stuck spirits move to where they're supposed to be. Psychopomp, it comes from the Greek, and it basically means guide of souls, or, and it's a type of work that a lot of shamanic practitioners do all over the world. Shamans are, work soon after somebody dies, frequently, to help them ease the process of crossing over. And, we treat these spirits as clients. We give them respect and understand that if they're stuck, they're actually suffering. Imagine living in a world where you can't really affect much, and all you can do is observe. Over time, that's not fantastic. And so, really, when you cross over, it's a beautiful thing, and, you're in, it's been, described as a place of just absolute warmth, comfort, love, and welcoming. And, at this point, I don't have an opinion about where terrible people go when they die, if they experience a hellish world, or who makes that decision, or, what have you. I don't know what happened to Hitler, for example, in the afterlife, and I don't have much interest in visiting him. So I'm probably not going to do that journey anytime soon out of intellectual curiosity kind of thing. But what happens for most people when they cross over is, a lot of stuff gets stripped away that's closely associated with the body. For example, trauma gets stripped away, and wounding gets stripped away, and so people do change when they cross over. They become more quote unquote angelic and beneficent. So some people, when I teach shamanism, we get upper world helping spirits, which sometimes are humans that have crossed over, that come, that want to continue to work with us. Sometimes those are people's ancestors, like a father or grandfather or grandmother who have passed away. And sometimes those people weren't very nice people in their lifetime in 3D reality while they were still alive. And that can be a hard truth to accept for some people. And what I tell people when that happens is that this is sort of a purified version of that person, right? This is the person like who all of the cruelty, meanness, narcissism, ego, all of that stuff was stripped away. Some people call that going to spirit school. And so they're coming back as a beneficent being who only has good intentions and is not cruel or harmful or anything like that anymore. So that's what happens when we cross over. Now, if you haven't crossed over, if you're stuck here, if you're stuck in the middle world, things are a little bit different because you haven't gone through that process yet. And that's what we call ghosts. Ghosts are generally speaking stuck spirits. That being said, there are a lot more spiritual beings in the middle world than just ghosts. In fact, most spirits in the middle world are not, in fact, discarnate human beings. So a lot of the stuff that we experience, if you experience paranormal activity, might be nature spirits or what I call spirits of place. A lot of spirits get very strongly associated with a place, and that includes buildings like homes, especially if your home's been there for a while. You could have house spirits. These were called house daemons. In Greek times, they had helping spirits that watched over the home and protected the inhabitants and that sort of thing. But a lot of sort of bothersome paranormal activity can be stuck spirits because they're trying to like reach through, communicate, they're suffering, sort of desperate for attention. Imagine if you were ignored by the entire planet for, years, decades, and couldn't really, had a really hard time affecting physical reality. If you could all of a sudden get the power to get some attention, affect physical reality, you might act up a little bit, like a child who acts up in a negative way to get attention. Spirits can kind of do the same thing. And sometimes it's a cry for help. And I believe that one of the reasons I experience a significant amount of paranormal activity in my life is that spirits can sense when people can help them. And given that I have a lot of training in sort of psychopomp work, and have a lot of experience doing that kind of work, I think spirits kind of come knocking on my door when they encounter me. I also think that certain types of activities make people kind of light up on the, what you might call the astral plane or the etheric plane or, other planes. And I've done a tremendous amount of spiritual work. Besides shamanism, I've done a lot of ritual work that is designed to sort of affect my aura in sort of protective ways and, to draw luck and to have harmonious relationships and that sort of thing. So when you do that, if you do any sort of ritual work, whether that is, it doesn't really matter what the tradition is, if it's designed to affect, energize, or change your aura in some way, or your etheric body, or what have you, you're on the astral plane, that can draw the attention of spirits, and they can kind of act up a little bit. So I'll give a few examples. So, one of the reasons why I have theorized that there's paranormal activity around me because of my training and experience is that, things really kind of ticked up for me when I was going through certain shamanic training with some different teachers that I trained with. I was trained in depossession work, which is, you might think of the word exorcism. We don't use that word because it's much less violent, and we don't treat spirits as enemies. We treat them as clients. And so I was training in depossession or training in psychopomp and death and dying work, and had a bunch of really weird paranormal activity, which brings me to my story. So, this was a number of years ago when I was going through an apprenticeship in shamanism, and then followed it up with some advanced training in psychopomp work and curse unraveling and all kinds of stuff. So, there was a significant amount of activity around me, and I will describe some of that activity, and some of it is a little bit hard to believe, and I understand that. But, I had some typical stuff going on. Like my office used to be in the basement of the house that I lived in, and I would be the only person in the house. My kids would be at school. My wife at the time would be traveling, away on business. And I would hear heavy, heavy footprints above me on the first floor of the building. And I thought somebody had broken into the house. I ran upstairs. I think I grabbed a stick or something in case there was a burglar in my home, and nothing. And that started happening almost every day. And I would come back from a training, and the woman I was married to at the time would wake up in the middle of the night and see somebody standing at the foot of our bed, looking down at us, freak out, wake me up. There's nobody there. And some of this stuff, a few things you could sort of say, well, maybe they were asleep. And I didn't believe any of this stuff was really happening at first, I should say. I was not a strong believer in ghostly activity or paranormal activity when I started out, even though I was training in spirituality. At the time, I thought most of it was rubbish, and people were not making things up, but experiencing other things that they just hadn't looked into enough to explain. So, the footsteps, my wife and my kids seeing people, both seeing strange, shadow people in the house and that sort of thing, and me catching things out of the corner of my eye, and doors opening up on their own, and all kinds of stuff. And then it started to really intensify, and it intensified in a really strange way. Rather large things in my house would disappear, so they would be gone, and they would show up in really weird ways. And it wasn't just at my house. So the first thing was I went to a training, a shamanism training with my teacher, and I have a little bear totem that I bring with me that I place on the altar when I do training or when I'm teaching, and I've had it for a long time. It's carved. It's carved into a fossil. And it's a precious spiritual item to me. And when I got home, that was missing, and I remembered packing it into my bag, so I thought, well, I probably dropped that. So I emailed everybody in the class and said, did anybody happen to see or pick up my bear totem? And it looks like this, and I described it. And nobody had seen it, and somebody even volunteered who lived close to go back to the place where the class was. It was about, a little over an hour from where I lived. Go back and look for it, and she did and didn't find it. And I even drove back, with my kids and with a flashlight searched the driveway area of the building we were training in, not to be found. So I thought, well, I dropped it somewhere weird, and maybe it'll show up and maybe it won't. Maybe it's just lost at this point. So about a week later, and at this time I was driving, I was driving a certain car. We had 2 cars at the time. I was driving a certain car, and I hadn't driven the other car at all. And about a week later, I went to get into the other car, and there was something sitting in the driver's side seat floor, wrapped up in some papers. And I unwrapped it, and sure enough, it was my bear. And it was wrapped in papers that had printing on them, and I have never seen that in my life. And nobody had been in that car since I had been at training. It had been locked in my driveway. So how did it get there? Unknown, right? So my laptop disappeared from my desk. I went downstairs to work on my laptop, and it was missing, and it went missing for a couple of days, and I was really frustrated, and I was going through, I think I was going through depossession training at the time, and this wasn't the only thing. Lots and lots of things would disappear in my house and then show up again in weird ways. And so I went upstairs to take a shower one day, and there was a bookshelf next to the master bathroom. And I remember placing my hand on top of the bookshelf and looking at it, and I don't know what I was thinking, but I went in and I took a shower, and I came out, and my laptop was sitting right where I had placed my hand, and there was nobody else in the house. So how did this happen? Well, I'll talk about that in a minute. There's more to the story. So I was, taking my daughters out to dinner to go get some pizza at a pizza place. And it was summertime, and my daughter was wearing sandals, and she kicked them off in the back of the car. And then when we got to the restaurant, I said, okay, parked in the parking lot. Nobody got out of the car. The windows weren't open. We had the air conditioner running. And my daughter looks down and says, I can't find my sandals. And I was like, well, they must have gotten under the seat or something. We tore that car apart and never found those sandals. They absolutely disappeared into thin air. There was nowhere they could have gone. We looked under every seat. We pulled up the rugs. The window had not been open. The doors had not been open. Nothing. They were just gone. Just gone, never returned. So we had to actually drive, because at least in the United States, I don't know how it is everywhere else, but you can't go into restaurants without shoes on. So we had to run to a store and buy her some sandals so we could go out to eat. So that happened, these are just a few examples. So a lot of this stuff happened. So I went to this training. I was training with this teacher from the West Coast, and, I was talking to her before the class. I'm like, all this stuff is disappearing, and, I don't know what's happening. I don't get it. But, I'm hopefully, it's become kind of an annoyance. I can't have my laptop go missing for 3 days, or, precious spiritual items, or my daughter's shoes while we're on our way somewhere. So, and this teacher's like, well, it's really hard for spirits to do that sort of thing. So I think something else is going on. Like somebody in your house is moving your stuff, or, and you just haven't noticed or whatever. And I thought to myself, okay, well, that might explain some of it. I don't know. But it was, things like the examples I've presented over and over and over and over again. So then, the class starts and we're in the training, and the teacher is going to demonstrate something to us. So we're all sitting on the floor in this very tight circle, almost shoulder to shoulder. And all of our things that we bring, and if you ever do training in shamanism, there's a lot of stuff. You have drums and rattles and stuff like that. All of my stuff is behind me, about 10 feet behind me, and including my rattle, which is sitting on a cushion. And, the teacher's teaching, and all of a sudden the rattle starts to shake itself and, audibly and visibly shake. So you can hear it and see it. And there's nothing else. There's no tremor in the room. Nobody else's rattle is moving. Nothing else in the room is moving. There's not an earthquake. There's no wind blowing through the room. There was nothing physically touching the rattle that could have been moving it, or no physical phenomena that could have been causing that to happen that anybody could observe. The person sitting next to me turned around and saw it, and then looked at me with the widest eyes and said, and I will paraphrase a little bit here because of the expletive, "What the F is that?" And I just looked at her. I'm like, it's my rattle shaking itself. Don't worry about it. And I think that's funny, right? Like, I actually think some people are frightened by this story. This is a story I told on another podcast, and some people are really frightened by that. I wasn't particularly frightened by it. Annoyed by some of the things that were happening. So finally, this teacher who witnessed the rattle shaking on its own, as did 20 other people in the room, looked at me and said, "Okay, I believe that I believe what's going on is happening." And so we did a little work in the class, and we did, I did some work on the side to sort of make some peace with the spirit that was taking and moving my stuff, and sort of found out who it was and what was going on. I'm not going to talk about who it was or what was going on. Not that it wasn't anybody famous or anything like that, but I'm respecting my spiritual client's privacy at this point. But there was spiritual activity, and it did calm down for a while. And a lot, other things happen that, certain things will happen around me, like electronic devices will start to fail around me in weird ways. Like, my phone will die all of a sudden, or, one of the things that happened during this time was the radio in my car started tuning itself to different stations. And this was an older car, and it had a manual dial, and that was actually turning itself to tune to different channels. So there were, physical phenomena, electrical phenomena, the sounds of the heavy footsteps above me, all of that stuff was going on. And so that's one thing that happened. And I might attribute some of that to my imagination if it hadn't been witnessed by other people, a lot of other people. And, if it were a couple of incidents, I might say, okay, well, I don't really know if something's going on. But this was a lot of incidents, a lot of incidents, all in a really short period of time, all very similar, and in journey, turned out to be a particular spirit who had some power, because to make something disappear and show up somewhere else, that's not an everyday activity. I can't do that unless I, physically pick it up and carry it somewhere. That is it was a spirit who had some skill during his lifetime in spiritual stuff, and could figured out how to affect material objects on the physical plane. So anyway, yeah, I mean, I tell this story to some people and they're like, oh, that's, that's really freaky. Well, that happens to me enough now that story doesn't really freak me out. And, sometimes another thing that's happened really weird is I've found things in my house that don't belong to anybody and didn't have a way of getting into my house. A weird Japanese keychain was on my living room floor the other day. I found a padlock under my bed that didn't belong to anybody. And I don't keep anything under my bed, and I don't have, any reason to have a padlock there. And I showed it to everybody who had been in the house, and nobody recognized it. So, stuff like that. So let's talk a little bit about what you can do if you have troublesome spirits in your environment. Because I want this to be sort of useful. And this, particularly this will work in, home or an office or what have you. So, one of the first things I might do is to try to make peace with the spirits that are there. And the reason is that it might not be a stuck spirit. It might be a nature spirit or what have you, or an ancestral spirit coming back from across the way. The way to tell if it is a stuck spirit really is you've got to seek the help of a practitioner who has skill in this area. So you could seek out a shaman. You could seek out a medium. Certain people have clairvoyant abilities. They can see or hear or talk to spirits. So you've got to seek out somebody who has some skill in that area. It's a little bit hard to differentiate yourself. But the first thing you can do is you can try to make peace. And if you think about it like any kind of relationship, it's a healthy thing to do in relationships to set boundaries, right? So if I have a relationship, like a romantic relationship with somebody, and something, they're doing something that is hurtful to me, I have a right to say that's hurtful to me and that's not okay. In an assertive but loving way. So the same thing is true for spirits, whether they're in your home or your business, or they're following you around as a person. In my case, because the spirit was active everywhere I went, it was following myself and another family member around. So actually, sort of feeding off our energy as well, and using that energy to affect the physical matter. I won't get into the whole spiritual physics of it, but, anything that does anything is energy, right? The ability to do anything is, requires energy. Energy is the capacity to do work. That's the physics of it. One way you can make peace with spirits in your home or business or whatever is you can talk to them. Most spirits cannot read your mind. There certainly are spirits that you might be able to communicate with telepathically, but if it is a ghost or stuck spirit or, certain nature spirits or whatever, they don't generally read minds. And so you have to actually talk out loud. And that might feel a little bit weird unless you're a person who normally talks to spirits or talks to themselves or what have you. And people might look at you a little weird. So this might be something you want to do on your own when you're alone. But one way, and this was taught to me by somebody who practices the art of conjure, which is, comes from African American folk magic, is to, you sit at a table and you light a candle, and you have a glass of water next to it, and the glass of water is a form of offering. It's a form of nourishment. So you're not going to drink the water afterwards. Generally, it's a good idea to dispose of it outside afterwards, and like water a plant with it or something like that. So you light a candle and set a glass of water next to it, and you sit and you just speak to the spirit and, introduce yourself. Hi, I'm John. I noticed you're in the house. I noticed you're doing this and that. And, set some boundaries. You're scaring my family, and that's not okay. So, I need you to stop that. And sometimes they will hear you and understand. And that's a good start, right? And if things don't calm down, or if they intensify after that, really good idea to seek the help of a practitioner who's good at clearing space, or working with nature spirits, or doing psychopomp work. Anybody who's a shamanic practitioner of any kind should be really good at this type of work. So another way to sort of make and keep peace with spirits in the home is to make offerings. And I did a whole podcast on offerings before. One of the best use of offerings is to to pacify, mollify spirits. There's some complexity to that, so I would check out, like, if you're, if it's, check out my podcast on offerings, or read something about how to give offerings. But basically, if you come from a culture that makes offerings to the dead, do that in the culturally appropriate way that you would do that. So if you're if you're come from a culture that has an ofrenda, use that. If you're from another kind of culture and you do offerings a different way, do that, because chances are that spirit probably associates with the culture that you associate with. Exception might be if you're living somewhere that's not native to you, or you're living on land where there are not your people didn't occupy beforehand. So, for example, I live on land that was previously occupied, or close to land that was previously occupied by Native American tribe. And so some common offerings might be cornmeal, for example, something that they understand from their lifetime, understand and respect. So I might make an offering of cornmeal I have an outdoor altar on the spirits of the land, for the spirits of the land here, which includes, potentially Native American spirits of, a tribe that lived here before my ancestors settled in the area. So, honor, respect, relationship. So shamanism, which is my path, is all about being in relationship to spirits. And, that's a really good way of thinking about it. So when people, sometimes they'll meet a power animal. Some people might kind of think of that as a spirit animal or totem animal. They're different things. So power animal is a particular animal spirit that works with an individual, where a spirit animal is more like, this is an animal I identify with, a breed of animal, or a type of animal, or species of animal that I identify with very strongly, identify with the qualities. And a totem animal is usually an animal that's associated with a clan or a tribe, that sort of thing. I might belong to the bear clan, and so the totem for my clan is bear. But if I have a bear power animal, that is a one-on-one relationship with the spirit of a bear. So some people get their power animal. We do something called power animal retrieval to reintroduce somebody's power animal to them, and the sort of the beginning of a relationship. And some people get an animal that they have a fear of, a spider or a snake or bat or, sometimes crow. I love crows, so I don't know why that would be. But I've had people like, ugh, crows, yuck. And that's not a good way to begin a relationship. Imagine meeting somebody in a dating situation for the first time, and they're like, oh, yuck. I don't like your kind of people. Probably not a good way, probably not a healthy way to begin a relationship, a strong relationship with somebody. That's not going to do you much good. So when you think about it that way, entering into relationship with spirit, and so when we do offerings, when we talk to spirits, that sort of thing, it's important to be respectful. And yes, this is my house, and I can assert certain rights to my house, but I understand that I'm not the only resident here. And I can assert boundaries. Certain types of behavior is not acceptable. Don't wake me up in the middle of the night. I need my beauty rest. Don't steal my stuff. I'm happy to give you an offering, but there are certain behaviors that are not going to be okay. Taking and hiding my things that I need, not okay. Scaring my children, not really okay either. Might be unintentional behavior on their part. So you can certainly set boundaries. Now, hauntings can be, in my experience, and I'll talk about sort of why spirits get stuck here in the middle world and not move on. Hauntings can be pretty challenging. So generally speaking, hauntings happen, a stuck spirit is a human being that, so I'm separating that from activity of other types of spirits, nature spirits, spirits of place, things we might consider gods and goddesses or helping spirits. So we're talking about stuck spirits, and they get stuck for a few different reasons. So these are generally human beings. In my experience, animals don't really become stuck spirits, and there's a couple of reasons for that. So, although people might see ghostly dogs or, that sort of thing, I think they're probably nature spirits at that point. I think they're probably not. They're appearing that way, but they're probably not actual dogs that passed away. They tend not to get stuck. In my experience, I have not encountered ghost animals. People, though. So what happens that causes somebody to be stuck? So this is usually a death where the death comes as a shock or a surprise, some sort of traumatic death. Not always, but most of the time. So the things we think about are like murder and suicide are a good example to that. And I realize that suicide isn't necessarily shocking or surprising, but it is it's an act where a person is in such horrible pain to end their life at that point that sometimes they get stuck. And there's some other stuff that goes on with suicide, with soul loss, when one wishes oneself dead or thinks one's better off dead. The soul kind of separates from the body, becomes dissociated a little bit, and that can cause some pretty severe soul loss. And then if somebody completes suicide and unfortunately dies, they can wind up being stuck here because there's so much soul loss. It is very sad, and I really, if you in any way ever feel suicidal or like you need help, I hope that you reach out for the help that you need. It's not a good thing, and it's not necessarily it's really not an answer to anything. And I recognize how much pain people are in when they're going through that, and how clouded our thinking becomes, and the types of thoughts that go through people's heads. I do understand that. So if you ever consider that, or you feel that way, or you have thoughts that are overwhelming and you can't control them, please, please, please reach out for help in your area. Call emergency services or call a suicide hotline, and get the help that you need. So murder and suicide are ways that spirits get stuck here. Things like accidents and natural disasters, so car crashes, plane crashes, tsunamis, that sort of thing. Any kind of mass casualty event, could be a fire or, anything like that where, the death is either violent or surprising or shocking. Human spirits can get stuck. And, I have theories about that. I don't know 100% why that is. But I think it has to do with the shock, and that the soul, the consciousness, is not accepting that it's in fact dead, or there are other reasons why it gets stuck here. And so these spirits get stuck. Animals don't really have an ego in the same way that people do. I'm not saying that animals are not conscious and they're not and don't have souls. They absolutely are conscious, and they absolutely have souls. But they don't get stuck here, and I think it has to do with ego structure. So, it is what it is. I don't, I'm theorizing at this point, but in my experience, animals don't become ghosts and don't become stuck spirits. I could absolutely be wrong on this, but I've run into a lot of spirits, and that hasn't been an experience of mine. So, so these beings can get stuck, and what practitioners who are trained in psychopomp work can do is help them move to where they're supposed to go. And we do that with the help of our helping spirits. And we do that with the full conviction of where they're going next is going to be a wonderful place where they're going to feel at ease, and there will be no suffering. And there, is going to be a beautiful, welcoming place for them, and help them move to that place. It takes a fair amount of training to be able to do that work. I don't recommend that to people who haven't gone through, the stages of training that are required to do that sort of work. So anyway, that's that's psychopomp work. So if you have a condition like that, you can call in somebody who's helpful at helping souls cross over. And not just shamanic practitioners can do that, but people who are mediums sometimes can do that. Not a huge fan of exorcising spirits. That's sort of a combative way of approaching it. And again, if it's a suffering spirit, practitioners should treat that as a client, the way you would somebody with a body. So from a shamanic perspective, there are lots and lots of spirits in the world. Some of those spirits have physical form. Some of them do not. Right. So when you die, you're not really attached to your physical form anymore. So your spirit is sort of formless, but your consciousness still holds a form for it. Right. Your soul body still holds a form, which is why when, if people see spirits or, in ordinary reality and they're not in trance, they might see them as just shadowy or translucent or, sort of amorphous, foggy balls of light, that sort of thing. And that, is a little bit of spiritual energy bleeding through into the physical realm. And, most spirits can't do that, or requires too much energy to do that, or they don't know how, or they just don't want to. They just don't have an inclination to take on physical form. Physical form's hard, I've got aches and pains. I'm sure you do too. Physical body's hard. It is a blessing, though. It is a blessing to have a physical body. To be able to work in this plane, but understanding that there are many, many, many other planes. So it's important to treat your body well. It's important to take care of it and that sort of thing. And I realize I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but that's a normal thing for me. So as we come into the darker months, at least if you're in the northern hemisphere, something to think about. And I did another podcast on ancestors, and I did another one on setting up altars, and having an ancestor altar is another good way to sort of maybe calm the spirits in your home, because the ancestors will take care of your home and sort of keep things in order. Their spirits can cross over, particularly if they're honored here. So, you might, if you live in a culture where it's traditional to have an ancestor altar, keep that up. That's a fantastic lineage to have. And if not, you can certainly find ways to keep an ancestor altar. Could be, photographs and candles, and you make offerings of flowers and that sort of thing. And that can exist in your home without appearing too shocking to people who might not understand or might be opposed to any sort of spiritual work, or might think you're worshiping the devil or something. I don't know. I think, certain people, when they find out what I do, I think, might associate what I do with some kind of dark magic or something evil or something. And quite the opposite is true. I assure you. But you can keep an ancestor altar that is fairly low key. And my one recommendation for that, if you set up an ancestor altar, is to not keep it in a bedroom where people are sleeping, because it can become quite an active location and can kind of mess up your sleep a little bit. So, I keep mine in my dining room where my family eats, and where we, use the dining room table to play games and have lots of family activity. And I just consider these are deceased people, but they're people that are still part of my family, and I'm including them in activities that my children and I are taking, and hopefully they take some joy from that, and will, in return, watch out for my children and watch out for my home and keep us all safe, and that sort of thing, and also maybe kind of keep the spirits a little bit calm around me, make sure they're not stealing my stuff, or destroying my electronics, or waking me up at night. So with that, I will end this podcast. I hope this has been interesting. I hope I have left you with some useful information. As always, if you have suggestions or things that you're interested in, you can feel free to contact me through my website, which the URL for is announced at the end of every episode. I hope you'll subscribe via wherever you get podcasts and listen to me some more. I love talking to people all over the world. I love and appreciate you. And I hope that you and your loved ones stay healthy and happy and loving.
have been listening to Speaking Spirit with your host, John Moore. For more info or to contact John, go to mainshaman.com. That's maineshaman.com.